All right, welcome to another episode of our Discord dashboard series. So we're gonna hop over to the backend Nest.js project, and what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to create an endpoint, so that way we can fetch the guild configuration data from the client side, or I'm sorry, from we're gonna fetch it on the client side. So we're gonna have to make an API call to our Nest API from our React application. Okay, so because we're getting the guild configuration, let's go ahead and do this. So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new module, just because this is going to deal with guild configuration, and I don't want to really, like I said, I don't. It's good practice to put every domain into its own module, so that way you don't combine everything all in one module. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and create a module real quick. So let's type nestg module, and we'll type, let's see, guilds module. Yeah, I think guilds module should be fine. Yeah, that's fine. So that should create a module for us, and then we'll go ahead and go over here, and you can see we have the guilds module right here. And we're gonna have to do the same thing that we've done with every single module: create the controllers, create the services, okay, and then create the interface that our services will and create the interfaces that our services will be implementing. Okay, so let's start off with, before I do that, let's go over to our constants. For the routes, I'll add a guilds route. Okay, and for services, I'll add a guilds services. Like that. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, let's go over here into controllers folder. Let's create a guild.controller.ts file. Let's use the controller decorator, and let's import the routes enum and reference guild. So this will map this controller with the guilds route. So every single route over here will be prefixed with /guilds. We'll go ahead and create the guilds controller. Okay, and we'll go ahead and go into guilds module inside the parentheses, or not parentheses, inside the curly braces of the module decorator. We will go ahead and add the guilds controller, which literally just comes from this class right over here. So now you can see down here, API/guilds is mapped, but the actually, let me actually fix this. It should be lowercase guilds. There we go. There we go, perfect. All right, so now that we have the guilds controller mapped, the next thing that we'll have to do is set up the service, because essentially the guilds controller, what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and have routes that will give us the guild configuration. Okay, so we'll have a get route, and I'll just have this as config. So this route will be /guilds/config, and I'll just call this method get guild config. Okay, and this is going to basically call the guild service, which we're going to have to create the interface, create the implementation, and then inject that service into our guilds controller, and then we can actually reference it or use it. So let's first create the interface. And I'll go and do, I'll call it export interface, guild service. And it's always nice to actually use interfaces, because it gives you a way to define how your service is going to look like, and then you can create all the implementations. So for example, we're going to have a method that we're going to have to implement called get guild config, and it's going to return a promise, and that promise, the value is actually going to be a type of guild configuration, which this is an entity. This is a type ORM entity that we created very early in the series, or not in the series, in the backend tutorials, which is this. And again, this is exactly the same as this is the same exact entity that we have on the Discord bot. So if we change something here, we should also make sure we change on the Discord bot side as well. Okay, so I think this is all we'll need for now. In later episodes, obviously, we'll create other methods such as updating and deleting anything if we need to delete anything. But we'll just set one up for get guild config for now. So now that we have the interface, we'll go into services. We'll create a new file called guilds.service.ts. And remember, this is the same repetitive pattern that you have to do in Nest.js. Not that you have to, but it's usually what Nest.js encourages, the developers encourage you to do. Okay, so my guild service. So we're going to go ahead and implement that interface that we just created, and we can go ahead and implement get guild config. We don't need to have this type annotation here for the return type because it will already know already because we have it over here. Let's go ahead and annotate this class with the injectable decorator. And now what we need to do is we need to first let's do this. We need to go inside our constants. We can see that we already have the guild service already, so that's good. So we need to go inside the guild modules now, and inside the module configuration, we need to add the guild service to our providers array. So same way that we've done it the entire series. So reference the services.guilds. This is the token that we're going to reference to inject the guild service to anywhere we want. Okay, and the class that's going to be the instance that's going to be created when we that's going to be created and saved in the dependency injection container is going to be this guild service instance. Okay, so remember, like I'll probably make a video at some point explaining how the dependency injection works and how the inversion of control thing works, and also what the dependency injection container is, because I know it can be confusing if you don't really quite understand it. Okay, but essentially what we're doing is we are specifying this token guild service, and this token, whenever we reference it, will inject this guild service instance, and it's going to be the same singleton instance everywhere we inject it, and that's given from the that's retrieved from the container that stores all of the singleton instances. Okay, that's just a short summarized version of this explanation of what exactly this is. But now that we have this provider, okay, we can easily go to our guild's controller, and then we can inject it. But we're not going to do that yet, because what we're going to do is inside guild service, we'll go ahead and inject a repository, and we're going to inject the guild configuration repository because we need to obviously interact with the database on the guild configuration table. So I'll call this guild config repository, and we'll type annotate it with the repository type, which is a generic, and we can pass in guild configuration just like that. And now what we could do is we can easily just reference guild config repository and call find one and pass in the necessary criteria to actually search for the object that we need. So that reminds me, we do need to actually specify the parameters to actually search by. So in our case, I think the best thing to do is to search by guild ID. So what we'll do is in the interface iGuild service, I will go ahead and add guild ID as a parameter. And then right over here, we'll add that over here. And now, again, the reason why it's giving us this error is because we're not returning anything yet. Once we actually call the database and return the return value, the error will go away. Okay, so we'll return this .guild config repository, find one, pass in the guild ID just like that. So that guild ID is going to get passed into here. Okay, and right now we're getting an error because it's saying that guild configuration repository is a provider. We need to go inside guild's module.ts, and inside the module config, we need to add the imports array. We need to import type or a module, call for feature, and then pass in an array, and inside that array, pass in guild configuration like that. And that should get rid of that error. So every single time you need to use a repository, you need to make sure that entity is added. You need to make sure type ORM is imported into that module, and you need to also make sure that you add that entity inside the array inside for feature. Okay, now that that is done, now that we've finished our guild service, we can actually inject the guild service into the guild's controller. So let's do that. And remember, the type annotation is always going to be the interface. Okay. And now get guild config is going to actually need it's actually going to need a an ID, the guild ID. So because this is a GET request and not a POST request, we're not going to use a request body or a request payload. Typically with GET requests, it's better to use either if you need parameters for a GET request, it's better to use a route parameter, or you can also use the query parameters. But typically, query parameters are better for things for searching, such as if you need to search by some kind of filter. So if you need to search based on, let's say, the creation date, or you need to sort by, a sort in ascending or descending order. Typically, you would use query parameters for that. In this situation, we're going to actually just use a route parameter because I think that's the best scenario. So we'll go ahead and do that. And to actually get the route parameter, there's a decorator called param, and we'll use that inside the parentheses of our method signature. So get guild config parentheses param. Let's auto import that up top over there. So that comes from the Nest.js common package. And all we got to do is just pass in the parameter name, which is just guild ID. So whatever this parameter name is what you're going to pass into param. And you also have to make sure you prefix it with a colon. It's similar to express, how the route parameter is always going to be prefixed with a colon. Okay. And the guild ID is just going to be a string. Whoops, I didn't mean to write private. I thought this was a constructor for a second. It's supposed to be guild ID string, like that. Okay. And now in order to visit this route, we must have a guild ID at the end of the config route. Okay. And what we can do is we can just simply return. Well, actually, what we could do is, for now, what I'll do is I'll just do this. Let me just reference guild service, get guild config, pass in guild ID. I just want to show you how this works real quick. So we'll go into our browser and test this out. So right over here, you can see that we're in our browser. If I go to /API/guilds, it's saying cannot get /guilds/config. Okay, we have to pass in the ID. You can see that right now, if I pass in 1, 2, 3, it's not going to give us anything, though the actual status code is a 200, which is not good because, whoops, this is the React code. It's giving us a 200 even though no guild config was found, and that's not good because that's going to imply that a successful API call. Well, okay, so the API call was in fact successful, but it's actually better if we actually return like a 404. So that way on the front end we can actually, it'll be easier on the front end. Okay, you could also handle on the front end too. But this really all boils down to how you want to handle it on the API. Personally, for me, I think it's better to say to check to see if the value that we search in the database is truthy or not. So if it's undefined, we'll return a 404. So to do that the Nest.js way, what we'll do is this. So let's see. At the control level, I'll go ahead and save the return value to a variable. But we do need to make this an asynchronous function because we are going to use await. And I'll wrap this inside a try catch. Okay. And actually, we don't actually need to wrap this in a try catch because I completely forgot that Nest.js has its own error handling, so we don't have to worry about that. So what I'll do is if guild config, actually, let's see, return guild config or throw new HTTP not found. Actually, I don't even think we can do that. Actually, yeah, that's not good. Okay, that's fine. So if guild config, return guild config. Otherwise, we can just throw throw new HTTP not HTTP exception, and we can pass in a response string. So guild configuration was not found, and we can pass in a status code. So I'll use the Nest.js built-in enum, and I'll go ahead and do not found. So that'll be a 404. Okay, and I think actually I'll do this. I don't actually like the way this looks. So I'll do I don't really like the way how I have the structure. So I'll do if no guild configuration, we'll throw an error, and then we'll omit the else, and we'll just do return guild. I think that's better, because personally for me, I just don't really like just having like I don't really like having the throw clause just randomly like in the middle, or not in the middle, but like randomly there, like with no condition. I don't really like that, so I'll just leave it like that. Okay, let's test this out. So we should see a 404. You can see it says status code 404 guild configuration was not found. Okay, now let me go ahead and go inside my database real quick. Okay, so if I go into my database, you can see that I have these 3 guild configurations, and you can see that I have the guild ID. So if I just go ahead and just copy one of those 3, paste this here, you can see that it finds it, and then it returns it with no problem. So if we pass in a guild ID that is not in the database, it's going to give us a 404, which is, I think, the correct solution, because it's not found. You could also do bad request, but I think 404 is just fine. Okay, there we go. So this gives us the guild ID, the guild configuration for this guild. If I pass in a different guild, you can see that it gives me the other guild. The prefixes are different, the ID is different, and let's do this one. You can see ID 3, prefix is question mark, welcome channel ID is set to null. Okay, so the reason why this endpoint is important is because on the front end, we're going to need to actually call this endpoint, and then essentially what we're going to do for the current prefix is we're going to have to display what the prefix is, so that way the user can see what the current prefix is, and then they can go ahead and modify the prefix to whatever it is that they want, and then they click save, and then they'll update it on the database. So that's going to be the end of this video. In the next episode, I'm going to show you how to call this endpoint from the React application. I'm going to show you how to display the current values in the text field, so the user can actually see what the current prefix is. And then I'll show you how, and then the following episodes, I'll show you how to actually update the prefix. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Peace out.